I'm delighted to welcome my guest today to the studio, Bernie Taupin. Welcome, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning, I'm great. All the better for seeing you. Thank you so much for coming in to see us. I know you've got such a busy time because your memoir, Scattershot, is finally out and everybody wants a piece of you at the minute. I know you've been doing live Q&As, you know, big TV shows, all that kind of stuff. How has it been?
Well, the Q&As have been a great deal of fun, and I've been amazed by the crowds. I mean, we've had sort of, 1,600, 1,500 people. So we were up in Manchester a couple of days ago, which was kind of a trek because it was the day that the trains were on strike. Okay. So we couldn't take a train. We had to drive, and it was like 4 hours there and 4 hours back. And so I didn't get to bed till like 2 o'clock in the morning, then had to be up for a morning show. So, but I'm kind of getting used to it now. The jet lag has worn off.
Well, but I'm amazed that you're amazed that all these people want to see. I feel like I've been waiting for you to tell your story for years.
Well, no, they've really been fun, and the crowds have been so receptive that it's kind of fueled me and made me sort of get up and go, and very enjoyable, really enjoyable. I mean, you are famously private. Why have you decided that this is the time to write a memoir? Well, I think it's the perfect time. I mean, I'm 73 years old. It's not like I'm at the end of my career, but I'm certainly in the twilight years, so it seems a perfect time to reflect. You don't want to write a memoir sort of when you're halfway through your career, when you're around 50, and you certainly don't want to write one when you're starting out. So, I guess it's kind of a no-brainer to do it now.
And of course you are, a highly experienced writer, one of the most successful lyricists in pop history. But I imagine writing a book was quite a different beast, and you've taken quite a non-traditional structure with this, right?
It's very non-linear. As I say at the beginning of the book, I definitely didn't want to do sort of an A to Z autobiography. It was just not in my wheelhouse. And plus, I'm not very good at knowing when things happened and dates and, this and then. And I just wanted to write it as I wanted to write it. I wanted to write about the memories I had as they came to me, hence Scattershot. But it does start in a sort of linear sense. I mean, it starts with my childhood, and it talks about how I met Elton and our first sort of baby steps. And then really sort of when we go to the United States in 1970, that's where the Scattershot comes. It's almost like putting a couple of shells in a gun and just firing it in the air and seeing where everything lands.
I mean, this is it, and you've described it as blowing the dust off what I'd forgotten. So I wonder how many of the memories surprised you, when you start to kind of do that archaeology and think,
it was very analytical. It was like being on a psychoanalyst's couch, because what I would do is I would think about a particular incident or a moment in time, and then I would sort of embellish on that. And what happened when I started writing about it, I would start remembering other things. So it was, as I say, it was like psychoanalytic. Yeah.
And kind of connecting back your creativity, because your mother, Daphne, comes through as a real huge influence on you. Both as a songwriter, but also as a visual artist, a hugely creative person.
Yeah, I mean, she was my educator. Again, as I say in the book, I learned absolutely nothing at school. I mean, it was one of those sort 15, of right? educational holding tanks from the time you were 11 to the time you were 15, and they just basically taught you the rudimentary elements of everything, whether it was mathematics or English. But that was nothing I was sort of interested in, and everything that included the arts I learned from my mother, who was a true bohemian.
Was that the French side of the family? Your
no, well, actually, my father was French,
right?
And she'd actually been an au pair nanny at his family's house in London, and that's where they met. But she'd spent the war years sort of in Europe, Switzerland and Russia, in a very, very sort of one of those literary groups, So, again, as I say, she was a very bohemian influence on me, and everything I learned about literature and the arts literally came from her and her father.
Yeah. So, you and Elton met in 1967, and I know you recently said that the two of you never had an argument. Now, we are quite familiar with that story, that famous story of you and Elton answering the same
Probably
ad.
the most asked question I've ever had, I think. If I had to put one at the top of the list.
Exactly.
How did you and Elton meet?
But we always hear it from like his point of view. So this time we get to find out a little bit about the story and what was going on in your life. Because like you say, you left school when you were 15. You would have been 17 when you saw that ad.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And life was like really tough for you at that point.
Well, it was my escape hatch, basically. I mean, I really fobbed my way into it. I knew I wanted to write stories, but I really didn't know what the process was to actually write a song. So my contribution, the things that I sent in initially, couldn't really be called either poetry or lyrics. They were very free form, sort of had no sense of verse and chorus. So I was just throwing things at the wall and seeing if they stuck. And I literally was sort of flying by the seat of my pants. It was just a desperate cry to get out of there.
I mean, in this escape hatch, like what were you escaping from? You'd had a series of jobs that sound really, really difficult.
Well, if you've read that part of the book, you know why I probably wanted to escape. I mean, the thing is, when you left school, which I did when I was 15, back in those days in rural Lincolnshire, your opportunities were zero if you wanted to do anything other than work in a factory or work on the farm. And I didn't want to. I'd done both of those things and realized that this was not the way I wanted to spend the rest of my life.
You're working on a chicken farm when you answered the ad.
Oh, well, yeah, and the ultimate sort of penultimate part of that was, I was working on a chicken farm, and then the whole thing about the fowl pest took place, and all of the chickens were dying, and I was the one that had to sort of dispose of the corpses in an incinerator. So when you're sort of 16 years old and you're sitting on you're in a windswept farm in the middle of nowhere shoveling dead corpses full of maggots into an incinerator, that's when I kind of went, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I think I might give pop music
a go. Bernie Taupin, stay with me. There's so much more to us, but I want to play a track first. And I've chosen this one because it's the 50th anniversary of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road this week. It was actually yesterday. Apparently you wrote the lyrics in just 2.5 weeks. That's the story about this album. Is that true?
That was all, you have to accept a bit of urban legend in a lot of that. I mean, people love to put time limits on things. It's like, supposedly I wrote your song in 10 minutes, and supposedly I wrote Don't Go Breaking My Heart. It's just off the cuff in 10 minutes. And we wrote all the songs for Yellow Brick Road in 2.5 weeks. I mean, believe me, I wasn't sitting there with a stopwatch. They came pretty fast, but actual time limit, I don't know. I can't remember that.
Was it in Jamaica? Because I know Elton wrote the music in Jamaica.
Well, we were originally going to we did go to Jamaica to make Yellow Brick Road, but it was a complete disaster. And the reason we went there is the Stones had just made Goat's Head Soup at Byron Lee's studio. Mm-hmm. But we never could understand how they accomplished that, because we went there and nothing worked. There were cockroaches in the piano. The place they were having a strike, and the place was surrounded by barbed wire and guys with machine guns. And then there were people on the side with blowpipes that would blow sort of what's that? The stuff they put in walls, fiberglass.
Oh wow!
And they would blow it at people trying to get in the studio.
Oh,
so it was not really conducive to a good environment to make a record. So we had trouble getting out of the country, getting people to take us to the airport. So it was pretty disastrous, hence the song on the album called Jamaica Jerk Off.
Well, I've chosen Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting to play this morning, Bernie. Do you remember anything about creating this track?
Well, again, one of the urban legends, as I keep referring to, is that it was based on a pub that was in town close to where I grew up called Market Raisin, and there was a pub called the Aston Arms, and sort of Saturday nights there would get pretty hairy outside in the parking lot. So I think there was a slight influence there. I wouldn't say it was completely directed at that particular establishment. It's like a lot of the things that I write. You know, I start with one idea and then I elaborate on it. So it might have been the core element of the song. Apparently, I've been told that there's a plaque in the pub that says that, but again, that might be just somebody's playing with me.
It's good to know they're pretty proud of it. I hope they've got a tap for you as well.
Yes.
Saturday night's all right for fighting. Hometown homage to my guest today, Bernie Taupin. So you've grown up in the West Midlands, Bernie. You were always fascinated by America ever since your earliest days, and that comes through very clearly in the book. Why?
Not particularly in that song, I guess. That's one of my more, the old Homeland song. Why? Oh, we could be here all day. But I originally, when I was small, I grew up on narrative poetry that my mother and my grandfather would recite to me, which I loved and kind of fueled my games in my early youth. But then when I gravitated to music, the things that really inspired me were narrative country songs. I mean, the pop music of the time was great and it was fun, but it wasn't inspiring to me to actually want to write songs, whereas when I heard people like Johnny Horton and Johnny Cash and ultimately Marty Robbins singing narrative country songs about the real West, and they were singing about the real West when the TV cowboys were sort of all the rhinestone cowboys. No, I'm talking about before that.
Before that.
You know, people like Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and the Lone Ranger. They weren't the real deal for me, so I was very much looking for the real thing. Mm-hmm. And those records inspired me, but what they also did was they gave me a sense of history that I followed along with and began to read about. And I realized I felt like I was born in the wrong place at the wrong time. And ultimately, by listening to those songs, I realized, well, you can tell stories, but you can also make them into songs. So that was the original inspiration, and my love for my mythic America grew from there. And ultimately, when we went there in 1970, obviously, that was it. You know, it was literally kiss the ground and go, I'm home.
I was just saying to you, when I saw the film Rocket Man, which is obviously, you know, your story as well as Elton's story, and, you know, you had such a big part to play in producing that. That was what I loved. When Jamie Bell playing you arrive at that party, and it's like a pool party in LA, and you're just like, the look on his face is like, oh my God, I'm home. I'm here.
Well, I think that happened before then. I mean, even when, the funny thing is, I think people don't realize that when we went over there in 1970 and played at the Troubadour, people thought that was it. You know, we became stars overnight, but we didn't. We played at the Troubadour. We got great reviews, and it helped our careers immensely. But we literally came home after that, back to Elton's mother's apartment in Northwood Hills, back to our bunk beds and our, one room. So it was only the beginning, and we still had a lot of legwork to do.
Oh, I mean, but this, you settled in pretty quickly. You're a founding member of the notorious Hollywood Vampires, and of course you talk about that. You, Ringo Starr, Mickey DeLenz, Harry Nilsson, Keith Moon, and John Lennon, and your good pal Alice Cooper.
Well, Alice was actually, who still remains one of my dearest friends to this day. It was really him that kicked off that. It was basically like a sort of one of those literary clubs, not quite as literary, from the 1800s, the beautiful things. And it was just fun. It was great because there was no pressure on anybody to be, there was no sort of fan base involved. It was just all the same people having fun together. And it was a movable feast. I mean, people came in, came out, You know, some of them didn't survive. Quite a lot of them didn't survive. But it was just a drinking club, a bunch of guys having fun together.
It's interesting, you know, hearing you talk about the Americana, the poetry that you grew up on, and the country music, and this idea of the kind of vignettes, the self-contained story, and this mythic world. And of course, that's what you've gone on to create in your songs.
Right.
But interestingly, that's kind of spliced with that world, with the world of the Hollywood vampires, this cast of characters that, you know, anyone who's heard Tiny Dancer will have seen these people kind of cropping up. Have you always had that ability to connect with people, to make friends?
Well, I'd like to think so. I think that I've existed in all kinds of areas of life. You know, I can get along in high society, but I can get along in the world of cowboys, which I have. You know, I spent over a decade competing in cowboy equestrian culture, and that's completely different, because those are the kind of people that couldn't care less, you know, what you do of any sort of notoriety. It's all about your performance in the arena. So obviously I gravitate to that, because I don't like the spotlight particularly being on myself. But at the same time, a lot of people think that I'm a sort of complete recluse, and I'm definitely not Greta Garbo or, you know, Howard Hughes. I don't mind the limelight sometime. It's just I don't like it all the time.
Well, and that it comes through in the book, that kind of sociability and that conviviality, and how important big influence your friends have been on you.
Yeah, I very much like being a fly on the wall, and I think a lot of the book is that. I think that comes across. You know, I'm very interested in the peripheral. I'm always on the peripheral, and I like looking in, and I'm just interested in people. Yeah. And I've always been an observer. I don't think of myself as a songwriter. I think of myself as a storyteller. And hopefully, you know, it's almost cinematic. I like being a cinematographer to life. And people all around me interest me. I'm always interested in characters. And,
I mean, listeners will be absolutely thrilled by the stories of you meeting their music heroes who were your friends, some of which we've mentioned, but you also, you know, talk about meeting your heroes, people like Brian Wilson. How did that happen?
Well, it just happens. You know, the thing is, you know what's interesting about rock autobiographies or biographies or memoirs is people always pinpoint them and say, oh, it's all name dropping. But what people don't realize is that's the life you live, and your contemporaries are all around you. So it's impossible not to mention them. If people want to refer to that as name dropping, that's fine, but that's not a crime. I mean, we lived that life all together on the same level. You know, we traveled the same paths, and it's just makes common sense that you meet all these people as you go along. Well, and also
these stories that you tell in the book, they kind of illustrate the cultural crossover that was happening, because was it Brian that you met at Dean Martin's ex-wife's house?
Right, yeah.
And then he asked you to introduce him to John Lennon. So you have this kind of, you know, Venn diagram of all these different amazing cultural moments kind of coming together, and that's what life is like.
Well, also the other thing is that which I'm proudest about my book too, is that I chronicle different characters too, people that are not celebrities. I mean, there's so many stories in that book that connect celebrity with the regular guy in the street, and friends of mine who have just been very, very important in my life that aren't celebrities, and I write about them with hopefully with the same kind of enthusiasm I write about celebrity. Sometimes they're far more interesting.
What's interesting to me as well is that you do resist being too introspective about your songwriting process in the book. Why is that?
Well, a lot of it is that the recall is gone. People are always interested in why you wrote a song, when you wrote a song, what a song's about. And I don't particularly like, most of the time I don't remember where I was or when I wrote something. You know, as I said, recognition of dates and times is very, very foggy. And I don't particularly find it that interesting either. I'd much rather people come up with enjoy songs. You know, it's like, take a song like I'm Still Standing, which, you know, was originally written as a sort of kiss-off to a former girlfriend, but people think of it as an anthemic song for Elton's sort of strong will to survive, which is far more interesting because the kiss-off, you know, just gets lost in history and it's not that important and you regret it later on because there it is written in stone. It makes much more sense for it to be a clarion call for Elton, which I think is how I would like it to be remembered.
I think they call that the poet's truth. It's wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for talking to us about
it's my pleasure.
Bernie Taupin. Like we were saying, you know, so many people wanting your time this week. What happens next for you? Are you out there talking about the book for a while?
I'm actually doing the Cheltenham Literary Festival tonight. So I'm doing a Q&A there, signing some books. Then tomorrow I'm doing a couple of things and then I fly out tomorrow night.
Fantastic. Well, so grateful that you made time to come and see us on Six Music. We're thrilled to have you. Scattershot is out now. Bernie Taupin, thank you so much.